Welcome to episode 2 of Eideloctober. Nothing sounds more ancient Greek to many lay people than the word hero. The word itself derives from the Greek heros, which we don't have a full clear etymological history for, but appears to mean lord. Its use conjures images of brave warriors slaughtering hordes of enemies on the battlefield like Achilles, or monsters like Heracles and the Argonauts. But in ancient religion, the word took on a new layer, and that's what we're here to explore today. How does one worship a hero in Hellenism? Let's take a look. Kairete! You might notice a new look for my avatar. A couple months ago, I commissioned GaelicNox for a few more emotes for my videos to show off a wider range of emotions, and they decided to surprise me with a whole visual update for my avatar as a bonus. Keep an eye out for the new reactions throughout my coming videos. As an Athenian reconstructionist, one of the first things I was introduced to after starting my research on practice was hero cult, though the information of it online is surprisingly mixed and murky. One of the main branches of Hellenism I was able to find writing on in the early days, Julian Hellenism, puts a special emphasis on hero cult involving certain emperors and mythical heroes. The first book I read outside of blogs, written by Chris Aldridge, also added daily hero worship to the strange weekly ritual planned I later learned was pretty ahistorical, though much of the rest of the information in it was otherwise useful. The idea of the hero shaped Greek culture, religion, and philosophy in ways that have forever entrenched themselves in the memory of the so-called West. When we think of ancient Greece, we think of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the children of the gods and the monsters, both with the faces of men and without, that they slew. And we think of virtue and nobility, suffering and sacrifice, and often glorious death on the battlefield. However, when you take a closer look at the meaning of the term hero in Homer and in other mythmakers' works, it starts to get a lot murkier. The heroes of myth were not the only people honored with the title, and some folks honored with it, such as Oedipus from Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannos and Oedipus at Kolonos, seem more monsters than glorious descendants of the gods worthy of emulation. So, in order to start exploring how to honor heroes, we first need to figure out what the ancient definition of a hero was, and why they were honored in the first place. As per usual for my Common Hellenism series, although I may reference works and practices from around Greece, my focus is going to remain primarily on Attica. There are two main scholarly sources I'll be drawing on to define hero. The first is the aptly titled Bulletin supplement Heroes of Attica by Emily KEARNS, which itself opens musing on this very question. She quotes the cynic Menupos in Lucian's Dialogues of the Dead, who, after meeting Troponios and discovering that he was a hero endowed with the gift of prophecy, asks, "But what in the name of prophecy, what is a hero? Because I haven't a clue." Troponios replies, "A sort of compound of human being and god," and scholars have attempted to discover what this mix ultimately means. Some scholars have come to the conclusion that heroes were seen as powerful dead who the polis wanted to harness the anger of post-mortem, as Richard Seaford argues in Reciprocity and Ritual. We'll come back to him later when we talk about why the heroes were honored. The other major scholarly category included minor local deities that later became heroized when the larger city-states conquering the neighboring territory and began their often bloody disputes with one another. KEARNS ultimately focuses on the line between a hero and a god for her attempt at a definition, along with the function a hero cult may have served that wasn't served by the worship of deities and direct ancestors. The first thing she notes about hero worship is how unusual it is that it's located primarily at a tomb, which for the majority of Greek heroes, they only had one. The main exception being Oedipus, who had either 4 or 5 according to ancient accounts, versus the many temples the gods had in their honor. The practice itself, she argues, suggests that the heroes must have had a lower rank than the gods. The sacrifices were often less expensive and the shrines far less elaborate. Seaford notes that the tombs for heroes were often located toward the center of a city, rather than the typical burial place outside the walls, even for aristocratic families. We will take a closer look at the practices associated with hero cult later, but for now it's important to note the strangeness of the location of the tombs and the idea that the cult itself was not polluting, unlike visits to the tombs of the ordinary dead. My video on miasma and agos covers this in a bit more detail, link in the iCard above if you're interested in learning more about ritual pollution. KEARNS points the development of the hero cult to the spread of epic storytelling, especially in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Let's take a look at our second primary source for the definition of a hero, Jasper Griffin's Homer on Life and Death. Heroes, according to Homer, were stronger and physically larger than we are. KEARNS quotes Iliad 12:445 for an illustration on this point, as an example of what these ancient mighty men could do. They are often described by Homer as godlike, particularly the main heroes in the story like Achilles, Paris, and Hector. Some of the examples he gives are like Zeus in council, the equal of Ares, a man equal to the gods, godlike, resembling the immortals, divine, with the appearance of a god, and honored by people like a god. Heroines, too, have their beauty or grace spoken of in divine terms, have beauty from the goddesses, looks like a goddess, etc. Griffin points out that although these descriptions abound in the Iliad, especially when the gods and men come up against one another as Diomedes and Apollon do in Iliad Book 5, 436 through 444, the separation between the two in power and longevity is drawn into sharp distinction. Diomedes is described as a master of the war cry, and in a furor attempts to slay Aeneas, even though Apollon is defending him. He attacks Apollon 3 times, and on the 4th, Apollon outdoes his war cry with a nasty reminder of Diomedes' mortality and the difference in power between them. In other words, though heroes may be described as godlike, they are, as KEARNS said toward the beginning of her work, below the gods. This becomes especially important in the Iliad when we know heroes are the direct offspring of mortals and the gods, such as Sarpedon, Zeus' son. Zeus watches intensely in Book 16, 638 through 650 as the armies fight over Sarpedon's body, which is described as unrecognizable due to both the conflict and the sheer number of darts and blood and dust covering his body. Godlike, child of the gods, and yet dead all the same, as his father watches on from Olympus, angry and trying to determine if he should intervene. A contrast to godlike being used as an epithet of glory is found in Book 22, 393 through 4, where Achilles boasts after killing Hector, "We have won us great glory, we have slain godlike Hector, for whom the Trojans made prayer throughout their city as unto a god." Again, the contrast is made, this time mockingly, as Achilles drags Hector's body helplessly through the streets, defacing his corpse. Griffin explores the idea that the gods in Homer are portrayed as arbitrary due to their deathlessness, as divine watchers as well as intermediaries whose decisions affect mortals but not themselves directly. Keep in mind this doesn't mean this is how the gods actually are, and for more on that and the interpretations one can draw from it, link is in the iCard above to my video on whether or not Zeus is a predator. However, for the purposes of defining a hero, Griffin points out that the hero with the most frequent references to godlike characteristics, Achilles, also resembles Homer's portrayal of the gods most in this arbitrariness and boredom. He resents having to do heroic things and ultimately die young, wondering aloud what the point of it all is several times throughout the epic. Glory in Homer, Griffin argues, is not an unambiguous thing. To be loved by the gods in epic is often to die young and to take many others with you before you go, often with your soul fleeing out of your body through a wound, bemoaning its fate on the way to Hades. Helen, who herself is considered a heroine, ultimately caused the events of the Trojan War by running off with Paris and recognizes her own infamy in the epic. Achilles, who sacked over 23 cities and took epithets from such, recognized the brutality of his deeds right up until the bitter end and bemoaned the value of glory as worthless. He never even returns for the gifts promised to him by Agamemnon, and when Odysseus meets him in Book 11 of the Odyssey, he states that even as a king among shades, he would prefer to be the lowliest servant in the light. So what then, if not virtue, if not glory, makes a hero according to Griffin? Suffering. Suffering, he says in the conclusion to his essay on heroic death, creates song, and song creates pleasure for the masses. The great suffering and untimely death of heroes allows for future generations to find joy and catharsis in their tales, and this is how the heroes are ultimately defined in epic. Given the distinction of suffering primarily making a hero an epic, why would one choose to honor these seemingly special and rather grumpy dead? KEARNS notes that in the 4th and 5th centuries we see a sharp rise in evidence for the hero cult in Athens specifically. If we return to Seaford, the potential exploration emerges. He notes that in the 5th century, notorious funerary party pooper Solon establishes the Genesia, a simultaneous festival honoring the ancestral dead as a polis, and also a festival to collectively honor the Athenian war casualties at the end of campaigning season. This festival pulled what was once a private holiday into the public consciousness, uniting the populace under a single identity. Especially strong in this was that the war dead were stripped of their demes and buried in the most beautiful burial spots, regardless of citizenship or wealth. They became, above all kinship or class ties, Athenians, and war games were held in their honor. What does this have to do with heroes? Festivals associated with heroes were given similar treatment and special sacrifices, often with collective grief that was allowed to be expressed far more intensely year after year by the populace than at familial funerals. In addition to these public festivals, as of the 6th century, Cleisthenes created 10 new Attic tribes after approval from the Delphic oracle, each of which was named after and said to be descended from a different hero. These tribes, from what little we know of their rites, performed yearly blood sacrifices at the shrine of these heroes, and were designed to deliberately have citizens from all over Attica as members, further unifying the polis. Seaford defines the hero as a dead person presumed to be human at one point, or in later antiquity, an extraordinary human person whose funerary cult extends beyond their immediate kinship group. They are also distinguished from the ordinary dead in that yearly blood sacrifices were given to them at their shrines, which I pointed out was banned by Solon's decrees for regular funerary visits. These dead were often outsiders from other city-states who were said to have come to rest in Attica, often in a brutal and violent way, and their rage would then be harnessed by the polis to benefit the populace. Rites were said to be as much to quell the anger of the deceased as they were to honor them, and each hero was said to bestow evil on the enemies of Athens in exchange for their rights. Heroes weren't all anger and brimstone, however. According to KEARNS, as of the 4th century, we have inscriptions that show heroes could give good as well, or so the average citizen believes. She divides heroes into distinct classes, one of which was a hero of exceptional achievement cheated out of some reward who then acts with violence and is killed by outraged citizens. After reaching out to an oracle, they are told to bestow heroic honors, including a tomb in the center of the city and yearly offerings paid by the citizenry. The other hero of this type is an enemy of the city-state that later becomes a benefactor in death, such as Oedipus. The nicer heroes, by contrast, often only take offerings when their tombs are disturbed and can be assumed benefited otherwise by those offering. There are also heroes who appear to specialize in certain things, particularly the healing arts, dreams, childbirth, seafaring protection, marriage, etc. The average person may go to a tomb of one of these heroes after being directed by an oracle with offerings for healing, an auspicious marriage, etc., in lines with the principles of Charis that I discussed in my video on offering. Link in the iCard above if you want to check it out. Much like the gods, these heroes were said to be capable of reciprocal relationships, but unlike the ordinary dead, they could do so with those outside their direct family lines. Heroes were sometimes said to fight spiritually on the battlefield alongside gods, according to KEARNS, defending the cities that paid homage to them and places that they held dear. Sometimes, like Eurystheus, specifically, they hold on to enmity from life against a specific group, in this case the children of Heracles, or the Spartans, and will only defend or aid Athens when their enemy surfaces. Others, such as Oedipus, who was honored at Kolonos and Areopagos, were said to defend from multiple threats, but especially when their specified enemy, in this case the Thebans, arose. The Athenian military was actually known for, quote, kidnapping, unquote, foreign heroes, such as Aiakos of the Aeginetans, and creating temenos and sanctuaries for them. Though the bones could create a stronger connection, they weren't required for a hero to shift his position away from the city-state where he primarily received honors. In this case, the oracle at Delphi, according to Herodotus, told Athens to refrain from attacking Aegina for 30 years, build the temenos after, and eventually steal the bones and bring them to the temenos. The Aeginetans tried their best to keep the location of the tomb secret due to their fear of this occurring, though it's implied by Pausanias later that the Athenians succeeded in acquiring the bones. The fact that the oracle advised building a sanctuary first, even without the bones, in a city-state where they were not located, shows us that the heroes were said to answer offerings and honors from anywhere, which is great news for us modern Hellenists. As was the creation of the Athenian tribes, because that means folkists are wrong when they claim that one's blood or DNA itself must be connected to the heroes in order to honor them. I'll go deeper into specific heroes and why they were honored and what their functions were in future videos if you all are interested. Let me know down in the comments if you'd like something more in depth. I have a few whole books on hero and heroine cults and more than enough material for a few videos on various topics. Returning to the hero cult itself, this shows that much like the gods, the heroes were said to have specific interests, albeit more narrow than the gods, who were often honored outside of their so-called roles. Their offerings were also different, burned entirely rather than shared with those offering, as was often the case with the gods outside of chthonic aspects. Many had blood spilled down holes into their tombs or on their shrines, and then the victims were burned. Though their tombs often weren't considered polluting, the fear of the rage of several heroes meant that for some, offerings were given to assuage rage when the cause was suspected to be displeasure, rather than always to gain benefit. Heroes were also sometimes appeased, as some were thought to cause disease when unhappy, where others were said specifically to be healers, without the implication of being the cause of the diseases they heal. So, how does one honor heroes in the modern day? Much like ancestor worship, it's likely best to have a separate shrine for the heroes given their drumpy disposition, rather than offering on the main altar. Libations of wine and offerings of incense have been recorded along with blood offerings of animals, but I went over why blood offerings may not be that feasible in the modern day back in my video on sacrifices. Much like the dead, it's best to invoke Persephone and Hyades before a prayer to the hero, and hero prayers were structured similarly to the prayer outline that I went over back in the video that I did on prayer, link above in the iCard if you want to check it out. Some of the heroes, like Heracles and Theseus, had sacred days in the monthly calendar, while others had specified feast days in the yearly calendar. Much like the gods, if you have a pressing need, it's fine to ask a hero for help right away, but if you want to maintain general charis, you don't need to give daily offerings if you don't want to. The ancients seem to think that yearly offerings on the sacred days and potentially on Ganesia sufficed. It's good to do research on the individual hero to see how the ancients regarded their temperament and what they were considered to be interested in. Heroes of Attica is available for those subscribed to JSTOR, and that means the actual paid monthly subscription. I couldn't access it for free, and it has a pretty thorough breakdown on several heroes honored in Athens. I wasn't sponsored by JSTOR or anything, by the way. I just wanted to point that out because you can download the entire PDF for free if you're subscribed to the monthly subscription. For heroine cults, which I can go over in a future video if you all are interested, let me know in the comments if you'd like that, Jennifer Larson wrote a book called Greek Heroine Cults that explored the subject in depth. An older breakdown, to be taken with a grain of salt in light of newer material, of Greek hero cults was done by Lewis Farnell, called Greek Hero Cultus. Each of these books goes in depth on individual heroes and also references their appearances in mythos, so you can get an idea of epithets and honors to invoke during prayer. It's important to familiarize yourself with primary sources and ancient attitudes when dealing with any entity, especially those that were thought to be potentially malevolent. Thank you all for sticking through that. As usual, it was a far more complex topic than I initially thought. If you're new here and found the video useful or learned something new, appease the subscribe button and accompany your lamentations with the bell so that the heroes of old may not bring their wrath down upon us. Drop down into the comments section below and let me know if you've ever looked into hero worship or done it yourself, and who your fave heroes are from any tradition and why. I'm not just looking to hear from Hellenists here. Any pagan of any stripe that's honored a hero, I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to help support the channel, links are in the description below to the channel Ko-fi, Patreon, and Amazon wish lists of research materials. If you pick something up off the wish list, I'll give you a shout out at the beginning of my next edited video after I receive it, and patrons get listed at the end of every video, along with perks ranging from early access to a monthly drawing for a bonus topic. If you missed it, September's bonus video on handling mythic contradictions as a pagan came out recently, link in the iCard above if you'd like to check that out. Special thanks to GaelicNox as always for their awesome channel art, link in the description below to their website and Twitter, and special thanks to my patrons. You keep the channel self-sustaining so I can keep my subscriptions to JSTOR and Premiere and keep making videos, as well as help pay for emergencies like the broken mic debacle from a couple weeks ago. And research materials for that matter. Seaford's book alone cost a fortune. I'm grateful for your support week in and week out, and hope the cycle of reciprocity between us continues to be worthwhile for you. Remember, we're stronger together.